Gargoyles was one of Disney's most complex, interesting, and dark TV shows that they've ever created. It's gained its own cult following, and it cut out a niche for itself in the history of TV animation and the Walt Disney Company. It was unique, yet still following some of the trends of the time. See, television animation took a huge turn in the late 80s and early 90s. While some shows had stuck around and were telling one-off stories, like Scooby-Doo or Inspector Gadget, other TV shows took a more serialized approach to animation, convinced that kids had enough intelligence to remember what happened from one episode to the next. Transformers, Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, and even My Little Pony were introducing long-form storytelling to their shows. Yeah, I said it. My Little Pony is great. You can't tell me that your favorite Earth pony isn't Tiddlywinks. She's cute, she's funny, and she has a tattoo of a bib. Do you have a tattoo of a bib? I don't think so. That pony is so nice and sweet, and you better not say a
Whoa, My Little Pony? This video's barely started and you're already off track.
Listen, Joe, I think this is a vital argument for the sake of animation history.
Is it?
Okay, maybe not. I just remember so many people looking down on My Little Pony as a quote-unquote girls show, and I thought I'd come on here and defend it.
Okay. That's fair. Surprising coming from your whole new cool guy attitude, but you gotta focus. This is not a My Little Pony video.
It could be.
But it isn't.
Okay, starting in the late 80s, television animation did become more serialized, which brought on this whole slew of different comic book style shows that actually acted more like comic books. Like, sure, you could read a single issue, but the story was much more satisfying if you followed it over a long period of time. Soon there were shows like X-Men, or Superman, or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and a show many regard as one of the best animated shows ever, Batman the Animated Series. Not long after Batman's success came Disney's first and only foray into a darker, more serious animated show, Gargoyles. So, my name's Josh Taylor, this is Modern Mouse, and today we're talking about...
Ooh, talk about Spawn.
Yeah, sure, we can get to that one. Are you good now? Can I get to the intro?
Yeah, you know, sorry, go ahead.
Alright, my name's Josh Taylor, Joe's here too, this is Modern Mouse, and today we're talking about the history and legacy of Disney's darkest show, Gargoyles.
There has been enough death. There are so few of us left, my brother.
I grew up watching the Disney afternoon every day after school. DuckTales, Rescue Rangers, Goof Troop, Tailspin, Darkwing Duck, all of them are classics, and all of them had small serialized runs for a few episodes at a time. But for the most part, those shows were all episodic, meaning that as a viewer, you didn't really need to know any previous knowledge. You'd watch the show, and from the opening titles, you could probably take a guess at what the entire show was about. There was Rescue Rangers, where they were solving mysteries, Darkwing Duck was fighting crime in the night, Baloo was a pilot, and yeah, Scrooge had a bunch of money. It's pretty easy to get. But then, there's Gargoyles. Gargoyles had a ton of lore, and many times they'd give you only bits and pieces of it in what seemed like throwaway lines. They're ancient creatures who turn to stone when the sun rises. They can glide, but they can't fly. They don't historically have names, unless humans have given them names. These are all things that play out over episodes or even seasons. It's one of very few Disney animated shows to ever have a previously on bit as part of its intro, in order to catch new viewers up to old information that had already come out. And in fact, I think it's about time that we do the same here.
Give the people what they want.
I'm just calling because I'm trying to find Josh. You seem to be the last person he talked to, and no one's heard from him since.
One question. Who's Josh?
All right. Let's do this, huh?
You're alive, man. Wow. Where have you been?
Listen, Joe, I don't write scripts anymore, all right? Just going by vibes now. All right, now that you're all caught up, let's talk about Gargoyles. I can't stress enough how different this show was. Disney had done adventure shows before, especially when adapting their films like Aladdin or The Little Mermaid to episodic TV. They'd also tried to do something a bit more outside of the norm with The Adventures of Gummy Bears, a show that plays with high fantasy concepts where these bears have a connection with humans and they have to defeat various enemies. But that show was much more cute and comedic. The real evolution of Gargoyles started with Greg Weisman, Michael Reeves, and a bunch of others who pitched the show. Initially, it was also more comedic, like The Adventures of Gummy Bears. But with the backgrounds of Wiseman and Reeves, the show morphed into something more serious.
She will come to free you. It's her I want. Then you are a fool.
Greg Wiseman had come from a background at DC Comics. He was a writer and editor for comic book superheroes until he joined Disney as a developmental executive where he'd helped launch Bonkers for the Disney Afternoon. Michael Reeves is the other big name involved in the series, along with his then-wife, Brynn. Listen, if you watched animated television in the 1980s or 90s, you probably watched one of their shows. Together or separately, they would write episodes of He-Man, She-Ra, Transformers, Ghostbusters, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Tiny Toon Adventures, Bobby's World, The Smurfs, and so many more. Michael Reeves in particular can actually be connected to television animation all the way back to the early 1970s. But both of them actually worked on a show called My Little Pony. Look at that, we've come full circle. So now we can start talking about Pegasus and sea ponies.
What did we talk about, Josh?
How I should stay on task and not talk about My Little Pony. But I was just about to get to the part where Molly, Megan, and Danny go over the rainbow to go to Ponyland in order to hang out with their pony friends.
And you never will. Plus, you named all these shows that were written by the Reeves and didn't even mention Batman.
Yeah, I was gonna get there.
You gonna mention that before or after the kids flew over the rainbow on the ponies?
Okay, fine. If you're so gung-ho to talk about Batman, why don't you just do it?
I mean, yeah. I will talk about Batman.
Batman, where's the virus? It went up in smoke with Red Claw's future. I should have known you'd have it all wrapped up before we got here.
While it's super interesting that both shows share some writers, it honestly would be really hard to dive into Gargoyles without first talking about Batman the Animated Series. It led the way for more serious, serialized storytelling and all ages entertainment, and without it, Gargoyles may have never been made. With the release of 1989's live-action Batman, The Dark Knight was reintroduced to the viewing public in a version much closer to his comic book roots. During what is considered the golden age of comics, most of Batman's earlier stories were gritty detective ones, often presented as murder mysteries. Then in the 1960s, the Adam West Show had forged a widespread cultural impression that Batman was incredibly campy. Throughout the 70s and 80s, the character was given dark and serious takes in the comics, most notably from creators like Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, and of course Frank Miller's highly influential The Dark Knight Returns. But the Adam West version was the dominant take on the character for mainstream audiences. In sharp contrast, Tim Burton brought to life a dark and brooding gothic fantasy set in an impossible and imposing Gotham City.
Winged battle flies through the night and finds me ready.
Inspired by the success of the film, Warner Brothers sought to follow up and launch an animated series, and in doing so, created one of the most iconic and influential TV series of all time. When the idea of pursuing a Batman series first came up, an unlikely duo formed as the show's co-creators. Bruce Timm and Eric Randomski had never produced a show before. Both were just excited to present their ideas for a new Batman series. Inspired by the Fleischer Studios' Superman shorts and the Tim Burton movie, and 1940s noir films, they set out to create a character designs and background paintings, culminating in a 90-second animated short as proof of concept. Hoping just to get their ideas approved and join the project in support of the art direction, both were surprised when they were handed the job to make the show. Their bold ideas for development soon attracted other people to join their team. Alan Burnett and Paul Dini both joined as writers, excited by the possibilities of making an animated series that was not just for kids. While both men had major contributions to the show, Paul Dini not only helped write some of the most memorable episodes, He was also part of the team that made the now legendary Show Bible. While many shows have Show Bibles, which is basically just a list of rules and core ideas about plot, characters, and setting, Batman's was different. For starters, the Show Bible was massive, at over 150 pages. For comparison, shows like Lost and Grey's Anatomy are both under 30 pages. Sure, a lot of the pages were images, but even those sketches were establishing the tone and feel of the show, as well as the show's visual language. And in their core writing rules, they set out to tell stories that were hard-edged crime dramas, constructed as tightly plotted mini-movies. This was revolutionary for an animated series, debuting alongside shows that were obviously designed for children. They wanted to make a show that would appeal to kids and adults, and the Show Bible went a long way to make that happen. Other rules in the Bible included only having Batman appear at nighttime to maintain his mystery and his power to strike fear. To further distance itself from the Adam West version, humor guidelines were created that pushed for dry, character-driven humor and absolutely no camp. They made it clear that Batman was the detective first, solving crimes through his intellect and fighting skills with minimal use of gadgets. And in the Bible, they even named their vision for style Dark Deco, a combination of the 1940s noir look and the gothic dark tones of the Tim Burton movie. The show being aimed at adults in the noir setting led to giving the villains actual guns as weapons. This was really unique in contrast to the endless lasers and energy weapons that played heavily in kids' shows, mainly to minimize violence. Another notable design element that came from the Dark Deco design was the use of black paper for backgrounds. That almost unheard of technique made everything darker, giving Gotham a perpetual nighttime look, with shadows everywhere.
You know what makes everything darker and cooler, Joe? Sunglasses.
What was that?
Nothing. I'm sure it's fine. I'm gonna go outside and just check on it. Just continue.
Other major innovations include actually adapting the look of the character for animation. The team had to fight for the clean, simple design the show is known for. There was the desire to have less details, boiling everything down to its essentials. Not only did this lead to striking character designs, but smoother animation and more interesting action scenes. You can easily compare this to the X-Men series that came out the same year. Their look was pulled from the comics and highly detailed, and at the same time, the animation was a little more choppy and less fluid looking. Not a bad show, but the difference is pretty obvious. We've mostly talked about the look and the writing, and yet the sound of the show was an absolute highlight. Inspired by the Danny Elfman score of the 1989 film, they sought out Shirley Walker, who had worked with Elfman, to orchestrate the film. And in an unprecedented move, they had her score every episode of the show. This is still something that only prestige dramas do, so another sign that they were elevating the show beyond the normal Saturday morning fare. And it would be impossible to talk about the animated series without mentioning the incredible voice cast. The recording sessions themselves were a real standout, done in the style of radio plays. Unlike most animation at the time, the whole voice cast recorded together, allowing actors to react and play off one another.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
But it wasn't easy to build out the cast. Voice director Andrea Romano had to listen to 500 auditions and 120 callbacks for the Batman role, and still hadn't found the right fit. But after taking the recommendation from a friend, she auditioned Kevin Conroy, who nailed it. Conroy saw Batman as a tragic Shakespearean hero and immediately picked up on the trick to the dual role of Bruce Wayne and Batman. Bruce is the disguise. Everyone knew they had found their Batman. Conroy would go on to play Batman in various properties over the next 30 years, until he tragically passed away in late 2022. For many, myself included, he was the definitive take on the character. Not to be outdone, they needed an equally impressive actor for the Joker. Similarly, they had trouble finding the right fit, as too many actors were giving the campy clown auditions without any real menace. Then they thought they landed the perfect Joker, with Tim Curry, actually, offering a weird sense of fun and danger to the role. They recorded 3 episodes with him before they second-guessed their decision and looked to recast the role. Coincidentally, it was around that time that Mark Hamill's agent called, because Hamill really wanted a role. Hamill was a huge comics fan and was just hoping to land any part, but he had no real hopes of becoming the Joker. He wasn't sure what he could bring to the role after Cesar Romero and Jack Nicholson. He just was hoping for a lesser-known villain. He also knew that everyone saw him as Luke Skywalker and thought fans would turn on him if he played a major villain role. He auditioned for the role anyway, not expecting to get it. But upon hearing Hamill's Joker laugh, they knew he was the perfect cast for the role. Mark Hamill, too, would go on to play the Joker for over 30 years, also becoming many fans' favorite take on the character, also myself included. He retired from the role when Kevin Conroy died, saying, "Without Kevin, there doesn't seem to be a Batman for me."
Okay. I'm back. What did I miss?
I was just talking about Mark Hamill and how he voiced the Joker. Probably his most famous roles in Star Wars.
Not a big Star Wars guy.
Were you more of a Star Trek guy?
No. Basically anything that has the word star in it. I'm just not into that nerd
So, no Stargate.
nerdy space Egyptians? No.
Battlestar Galactica?
I don't think I've even heard of that. Sounds awful.
Star is Born.
Okay, you know what? I like that movie, all right? Tell me something, boy. Yeah, okay. And now that I think about it, Rainbow Bright and the Star Stealer, that was a good 80s show. See, because there was a magical horse that she had.
No, we're not doing the magical pony thing.
But magical ponies had such a cultural impact on the 1980s show, it can't be understated. See, the magical horses that she had...
How about no? Maybe we back to Star Trek. The thing is, there's a bunch of the cast from Gargoyles actually came from Star Trek, so we could stay on topic.
Okay, fine. Like Joe said, there's a huge crossover between decades of Star Trek cast members and Gargoyles. The villainess Demona was voiced by Marina Sirtis, and the Elon Musk-like David Xanatos was voiced by Jonathan Frakes, both from Star Trek The Next Generation. Plus, there were cameos and guest appearances from a slew of other Star Trek alumni. The show also featured Ed Asner and Keith David, fairly big names in the acting world, and ones that would come after the success of Batman, when Disney wanted to showcase what they could do with a similar show. Gargoyles was complex, brooding, and just like Batman, it had a gothic tone to it. The show's setting of New York City looks strangely like Gotham, with dark alleys, towering buildings, and since the Gargoyles only come to life at night, a majority of the show takes place in the moonlight. Keith David's Goliath plays the leader of this clan of gargoyles. Cursed in 10th century Scotland, he and what is left of the gargoyles end up in New York City thanks to David Xanatos, a rich, conniving man looking to use the gargoyles for his own military purposes.
Owen, we'll need a cleanup crew outside.
Why were you attacked?
The richer you are, the more enemies you have.
This is where things become a bit more complicated. Because the gargoyles are awakened by Xanatos, they can't be completely angry with him. But at the same time, his menacing desire to use them as weapons makes him more of a lead villain for the show. Then there's Demona, the only female gargoyle, at least initially. She's loyal to Xanatos and ends up in a long-standing war with the other gargoyles, including Goliath, who was once her lover.
We owe our union to David Xanatos.
But how? You were shattered by the Viking.
No, I feared for your safety, so I left the castle to find you.
That brings us to Detective Eliza Maza, a human who comes to befriend the gargoyles. They help her fight crime, and she helps protect their identities and helps keep them safe during the day when they're much more vulnerable.
So, later tonight?
Also, Goliath, who's a giant stone beast, falls in love with Eliza, who's a human, but he still has feelings for Demona. It kind of creates this beast-human love triangle. It's weird, and I don't have time to fully get into it, so you'll just have to sit down and watch the whole show to understand. Plus, there's several other villains in the show, like a group called the Pack, or an alternate variant of Goliath called Thalog, which is almost Goliath spelled backwards, but you get the idea. Xanatos even goes all Dr. Frankenstein to bring back gargoyles from the dead.
Alive! Alive!
He ends up actually naming one of those gargoyles Coldstone, and if you know my history with ice cream, then you know that I much prefer gelato, so that guy. Oh yeah, and then there's Macbeth, and honestly, there's a lot of literary and Shakespearean references in the show. In fact, there are several instances where Goliath is reading books and building his knowledge about humanity. I know that there were shows like Tiny Toon Adventures or Animaniacs that made pop culture references that kids probably wouldn't get, but Gargoyles takes it a step beyond that. The show makes references to William Faulkner, Shakespeare, and many other writers that are way beyond the reading capacity of most children, and probably for some adults too. Oh, yeah, and Goliath and Timona had some serious sex and laid an egg which hatched into this demon called Angela, and so, yeah, that complicates things too. The other gargoyles in the clan end up naming themselves after New York streets, rivers, and boroughs. There's Hudson, who's the elder of the group. He's Goliath's mentor before he took over the clan. By the way, when I say clan, I don't mean the Ku Klux Klan. I just mean a group of gargoyles. That's what they call themselves. So, F off. Then there's Brooklyn, and he's more or less the rebel of the group. He's like Raphael from the Ninja Turtles if Raph had wings for arms and rode a motorcycle. Broadway is the biggest guy in the crew, but he's the stereotype sweetheart. And then Lexington is interested in the technology of the time. He also kind of looks like the famous Bat Boy. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it adds to the lore of the humans not really knowing if gargoyles are real or fake. Then there's Bronx, who's basically a dog in every way possible. Don't ask me why Bronx can't stand or walk on two legs. I understand it doesn't make any sense. It makes just as much sense as Disney having Goofy and Pluto both be dogs. One is a walking, talking sort of human, and the other one is just a dog. This doesn't happen with a lot of other Disney characters. I don't understand it. Listen, by their logic, dogs can have pet dogs, which means the humans can have pet humans, and that's pretty much slavery.
I know where this is going, and I'm just going to stop you right there.
I wasn't going to elaborate on slavery, don't worry.
That's good. Good, because that's not a fun topic.
I mean, I was going to talk about how some people like putting leashes on other people. See, there's some things that people are into in the bedroom, and I just thought that we could...
Nope, I've got to stop you a lot in this video, I feel, but we're not going there either. Maybe just talk about gargoyles, something you personally enjoy about the show instead.
Okay, I was doing that, but I need to talk about 50 Shades of Grey and how that's been such a...
Maybe something else.
Okay, well, the thing that I love about Gargoyles is that it rewarded longtime viewers. Before the age of streaming, back when you had to pay attention to the show week to week, you'd get a character who would show up for an episode and get sent to jail, or maybe they'd fly off into the sunset, never to be seen again, until they pop back up a few weeks or months later, revisiting a storyline that had been left lingering. It was a new concept for Disney, and it would pay off as the Gargoyles not only gained an audience, but an audience that was loyal. To the point that even years after the show has stopped airing on TV, there's been a continued push for comic books or video games, and even a board game for Gargoyles. Until the Rescue Rangers film came out, I'd actually say that Gargoyles was the most well-remembered and loved show of the Disney afternoon era, outside of DuckTales.
The important thing is, you are alive. Come, you will rejoice.
With the revival of DuckTales in the late 20-teens, Greg Weisman, who, if you remember back to earlier in the video when I told you that he was one of the creators, he has gone on record stating that he still has plenty of different stories to tell in Gargoyles. Like the Bible for Batman, Gargoyles' story Bible is large and could transition some of the stories from the comics back onto television screens. Of course, there's still a possibility that Gargoyles comics continue for years to come, especially since Disney now owns Marvel. There's also been rumblings and talks about the show being turned into a live-action film, which would be totally insane. There is no way that they make that movie and it doesn't come out PG-13. It would definitely be scary and violent and maybe sexual. I'm not sure, but it would be kind of cool to see it. But I think it's more likely that there would be an animated television revival for the show. If I had to label Gargoyles and sum it all up, it's like as if Disney decided to mix the X-Men with Batman the Animated Series and make it a story about demons and werewolves and evil billionaires. It's rich with ideas around who's good and evil. It's a show that more often blurs morality and shows that life is more than just black and white. Along with Batman the Animated Series, it helped set the stage for other shows that were willing to be dark and much more adult. Heck, even Keith David would end his tenure as Goliath and basically move right into voicing Spawn on HBO. On that show, instead of glossing over the sex, violence, and vulgarity, they dove directly into it. Spawn was much darker and grittier, and it pushed what animation was perceived as. But you have to say that Gargoyles was one of many shows that pushed the boundaries of what television animation could be. It showed that the medium of animation didn't always have to be seen as quote-unquote kid stuff, even though, yes, the show is a part of the after-school block. For many fans, it was a bridge to animation in adulthood, whether that be comedy shows like Family Guy or South Park, or anime like Full Metal Alchemist or Demon Slayer. Of course, there were other animated shows that pushed boundaries too, like Beavis and Butthead, Daria, and Ren and Stimpy. But Gargoyles, due to its ties with Disney, I would argue served a larger portion of a younger audience whose parents allowed them to watch the show. I know that personally my parents wouldn't let me sit down to watch shows on MTV or HBO, but they did let me sit down and watch Gargoyles. They thought that was A-okay. But I guess they didn't know that I would turn out to be... Oh! Joe. It's me.
Yeah, I know it's you. What's happening?
I wish I had time to explain any of this, but I've got to get things back to the way that they were.
How did you change your clothes so fast? And where are your dumb sunglasses?
Joe, I gotta go. This isn't like a evil versus good kind of thing. Or a good versus evil kind of thing, I'm not really sure, but it's kind of like that show Gargoyles. There's a blurring of morality, a lot of grays. I'll have to catch you up later, but I've got to do something important.